So we had a look at the essentials of the provider package. And actually, it's not just the essentials, it's pretty much all you have to know. Provider auth or consumer, to set up a listener to a provider, which you typically provide with change notifier provider somewhere up in the widget tree. Either as we do it here on the root level, or as we do it in the products grid, right above the widget where we need it. Doesn't matter. In general, you want to set up that provider on as low as a level as possible. So not necessarily up at the root level of your app, but of course, if you need it in the entire app, provide it here. So this is the provider, and you also learn about how to listen to changes and that you have some optimization potential with listen false, and maybe also by using a consumer if only parts of your widget tree depend on it. A valid question now, of course, is why do we not use a stateful widget here? We're now using the provider to manage whether our product is a favorite or not. But we only need that information here to change the icon which I'm displaying. Now, since I changed that icon here in my product item widget, we could of course also turn this into a stateful widget, have a is favorite or show favorite property in here, since this is a single item in our grid, and then simply change that property when we click this button here. And yes, this would be absolutely the right thing to do if you have some state, some data, which only affects this widget. Remember that slide, the bottom right area here? Widget local state. That's state which only affects a single widget. And if you only want to switch the icon on a button in a widget, then of course you would typically manage that state only in that widget, and therefore you would always use a stateful widget. Don't use provider or a provided class if you only want to change how something is displayed inside of a widget. Here I'm using the provider package, not because I want to use providers everywhere, but because the data, the information, whether this product is a favorite or not, does not only matter to this widget. Right now in our app it does, but that will now change. In the products overview screen, there, I now also want to add an icon or an option here in the app bar that allows us to switch between favorite and all products, so that we can actually take that favorite information and filter our grid here based on it. And that of course means that the information about whether a product is a favorite or not does not just matter to the product item, but to the entire app, or at least to a significant part of that app. So let's now start implementing that. For this here in the app bar, I want to add actions, or for the moment, one action. And there I'll add a widget, which we haven't seen before, a pop menu button. That's a button which will basically open a kind of a drop over menu, a menu which opens up as an overlay. Now we give this a button which should be displayed in our app bar, and that should be an icon widget, and there I'll use the more vert icon, which are three dots aligned or positioned above each other vertically. The pop-up menu button then also needs an item builder, which builds the entries for this pop-up menu. There you get the context, which I don't need here, so I'll add an underscore. And then you return a list of widgets, not a single widget, but a list of widgets, which will be added as entries in this pop-up menu. And here you should use pop-up menu items. Now each menu item here has a child, and that typically is some text, but could also be a row with the icon next to a text, for example. And here I'll say only favorites. And besides that child, you also provide a value, which is later important for finding out which choice was, or which item was chosen by the user. So I'll give this a 0. You can use any identifier you want, could also be a string. And I'll then copy this and create another pop-up menu item where I say show all, and there the value could be 1. Now on the pop-up menu button, you also add on selected function here, an anonymous function or a named function, it's up to you, where you will get the selected value. Now we know that we'll get an integer here, so we can add int here in front of that to make it really clear to Dart that selected value will be an integer. It will be this value, depending on which option the user chose. And for now, let's simply print the selected value to see whether that works. Now to see it in action, let's save that. And now you should see 3 dots here. And if you tap them, this pop-up opens up and you can choose only favorites or show all. And therefore here you see the 2 print statements for the values we chose. Now, first of all, such a scenario here is always a good place for an enum. Of course, we can use 0 and 1, but to have a really easy way of working with that, we can define an enum. Since we really only need it here, we can define it here in the same file. And I'll name it filter options, but the name is totally up to you. And there are 2 values I want to have, favorites and all. So these are the 2 values. And as you learned, enums are really just ways of assigning labels to integers, so that behind the scenes we still have integers, but we as a developer can work with these labels. So therefore down there, for this value, I'll have my filter options favorites, and here I'll have my filter options all. Doesn't change the way this works, besides one thing, this here will now be of type filter options. Now, the idea of course is to filter the items we're displaying based on the filter we chose here. And the most efficient way of doing this is to simply change the products we have here in our products class. Because we're consuming these products in the products grid in the end, we're setting up a listener to products here. So if the products change, this will rebuild. And it should of course rebuild when the products change, because we will change the products when the user selects to filter them. And that should affect our grid. So in the products overview here, we wanna find out which option was chosen. So if selected value here is equal to filter options favorites, let's say. And in that case, we wanna do something that reduces the amount of items we're showing, and else we're showing all items. So now in the product start file in our provider class, I want to change this items list based on, well, whether we set a filter or not. Now, one way of managing this is to add a new property in this products class here. Show favorites only, which initially is false. And then here, where we get all the items, we take this into account to determine which items to return. So here we could now check if show favorites only. And if that is true, then I want to return my items where, for my item which I'm looking at, is favorite is true, and then we convert this to a list. It's a new list automatically, so we don't need to do that manual copying. We're down there. If we don't make it into there, we return all items. Now this is one approach we can take. And now if we go to the products overview, here all we have to do is we have to access our products provider. So we get our products data or products container, whatever you want to name it, with provider, for which you have to import the provider package of. Now I'm interested in products, so we need to import that class as well from the providers folder, and they are from product start, and forward the context. And whoops, that should therefore be done in the build method, of course. And now with products container down there, we can say if we're in here, then I want to call some method which switches show favorites only, which actually should be private. So let's add an underscore, but then let's add a new method which you could name show favorites only. And then there we could set show favorites only to true. And then we have show all, and there we set show favorites only to false because we want to show all. And back in the products overview screen, first of all, I want to set up listen false here because I'm not really interested in the data or whether it changes. I only need to get access to that container so that I can call these 2 new methods we added. Because then here, if we are filtering for favorites, I can call show favorites only. And here I can call show all, like this. If we do that and we do a full restart, I can now actually filter for only the favorites or for all, but it doesn't make a difference. Reason for that is that in the products class, of course, we also have to call notify listeners to rebuild the parts that are interested in our products data here. So do it both for show favorites only and show all. And with notify listeners added there, now if I select only favorites, I see nothing. If I select show all, we see all. Looks good, but has a flaw. We could implement it like this. And I did it like this to also now show you what the problem would be. If we had another part of this app, which we don't have yet, but if we had another screen which also shows our products, then when we choose a filter here on the products overview screen and we then go to that other screen, our filter would still be applied there because our getter only returns data based on what we set here as a filter. And that's what we control from that other screen. Now, if you want to have an application-wide filter, this is your approach. But often, you only want to filter on this screen, and if you then go to some other screen, you don't want to apply that same filter. Let's say you have a screen where you manage your products and another screen where you view all products. If you filter on the all products screen, you probably don't want to filter on your these are all my products screen as well. So therefore, managing something like this filtering here in our provided class can often be a problem because it's really information that belongs to a single widget and not into the global app-wide state. So with that, we're back to this slide. We're more on the right side here with that filtering than on the left side. This actually is not the approach I want to use. I always want to return all my items here, and I don't really want to have these methods here which control what is displayed or not. I don't want to manage what is displayed in my provided class here, but inside of my widgets. And therefore here in the product overview screen, I don't really want to use my provided products data and switch my display state or my filter options there. Instead, the better option here indeed would be to turn this into a state full widget. The products overview screen is now a state full widget. And there in the state object, we can now manage this show only favorites data, which is a boolean initially set to false. And I want to switch that when we actually select the value in the pop-up menu. So if we did go for favorites, then I want to set show only favorites to true. And otherwise, I want to set it to false. Now, what do we do with that information here? Well, we can now pass that down to the products grid because that actually is the widget which displays our products. So there we can forward show only favorites. And now in the products grid, we only need to expect this. So here I have a final boolean show favs or whatever you want to name it. And of course, we now have to add our constructor to accept this show favs argument and store it in this property. And now here we can use show favs. We're fetching the items, but now I want to show only the favorites. And now to not have all the logic of filtering in here, we can still go to the products class and simply add another getter in there. A getter which still returns a list of products, of single product items, which I'll name favorite items, because here I will return my filtering logic where I access all items, then use where, and for every prod item I return true if is favorite is true, and then I convert this to a new list. So now we simply have an alternative getter, favorite items, which does that filtering logic, and I reach out to that getter in my products grid if show favs is true. So instead of using items here, I simply can check show favs. And if that is true, then I don't use product data.items, but I simply use products data.favorite items. And otherwise, I use items in general. So now we have a setup where we should still have a grid that changes, but we're managing the important logic in our widgets now. Now, one important fine-tuning is, of course, in the products overview screen, you should wrap this part where you change show only favorites with set state so that the UI is rebuilt when you change it. So let's move this entire if block here into this. This is important because otherwise you could change the data, but it would not be reflected on the UI. And now with that, if we go back, we can choose our filtering logic here. And as you see, if I mark something as a favorite, this also does work. But now we're managing this in our widget because it really only affects this widget, the product overview widget and its children, like the product grid here, of course, most importantly.